Okay, we're continuing with quotes. This is part two of Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher from the late 1800s. His next quote is, "All truly great thoughts are conceived while walking." And I do think we think better when we walk. What I think that's about is, like, for example, I'll work on a book chapter all morning, and then in the afternoon I'll be a little burnt out and I'll go for a walk. And I'll start noticing my brain works better as soon as I start walking. What I think that's all about is our brains are designed to work in nature when we're walking. You don't need to think that much if you're standing still, but once you start walking, you have to navigate, you have to avoid obstacles, you have to have a clear plan as to your destination, you have to be on the lookout for danger. So it makes you more alert. You get sympathetic activation plus when you're moving, okay? So a lot of times you do get good ideas. That's one of my favorite things to do now when I exercise is to read while walking on a treadmill. Because I found I can go 90 minutes and just read and get some good reading, good concentration, good understanding. I'll have a pen to mark it up. I'll dog ear, fold over the edge of the page if I think it's worth going back to. And I'll write summary notes in the back of it. But it's a good way to read. You have good alertness. Okay, Nietzsche, "I was in darkness, but I took 3 steps and found myself in paradise. The first step was a good thought. The second, a good word. The third, a good deed." Okay, great minds are skeptical. We did that one already. "To one who is accustomed to thinking, every new thought he hears is like a link in a chain." Sorry about the repeats there. Let's see. Okay, "Their knowing is creating. Their will to truth is a will to power." He was big on the will to power. "Intelligence is a moving team of metaphor." Yeah, the more you know something, the more metaphors you can create about it. A real scholar of a subject has got good metaphors on the topic. "The organizing idea that is destined to rule keeps growing deep down. It begins to command. Slowly it leads us back from side roads and wrong roads. It prepares single qualities and fitnesses that will one day prove to be indispensable as a means toward a whole. One by one, it trains all subservient capacities before giving any hint of the dominant task, goal, aim, or meaning to strive toward a higher goal." So I think what he's talking about there is, if you are trying to solve a real problem, like Pritikin was trying to save himself from coronary artery disease. I was trying to save myself when I was real fat from being obese, fat, sick, diabetic, and everything that goes with that. So anyways, what I'm trying to say is, you want to learn. You'll read nonstop, and yeah, you'll make mistakes. You'll try the wrong diet. You'll do other things, but you keep on pushing towards a good goal. And because you're trying to solve a problem, you keep learning. And like somebody who I think was not doing that would be like my father. My father was a bright guy, valedictorian of his high school, but he would just sort of read randomly because, to entertain himself, and he was tired after a long day at work, and he would sort of just randomly read. I never saw him pursue a subject, okay? Like pursue atherosclerosis, diabetes, coronary artery disease, and I think, that limited his knowledge, okay? I don't think he was as smart. When I was a little kid, of course, I looked up to him, and that was good for me to want to be like him, to read a lot. But a really smart person, when they're reading, very often they're pursuing a goal. How can they understand something? And that's a great way to read, because then you start connecting all these things. Like you read, several different books on the same subject. You put it all together. That makes you smarter. And you can do that in anything. Like let's say you want to learn French literature, okay? Read Les Miserables, then read The Little Prince, whatever. You want to learn English literature, read Charles Dickens, Tale of Two Cities, read David Copperfield, read, best book is Christmas Carol, okay? Whatever. You get my point. But if you do them all together, you can compare and contrast them. Read Tess of the D'Urbervilles with Thomas Hardy and compare that. Okay, so let's go to the next Nietzsche quote here. "Art and music. It is my ambition to say in 10 sentences what other men say in whole books. What other men do not say in whole books." Okay, so yeah, other things that pissed him off. He wrote what he felt was his best book, Thus Spake Zarathustra, and he only sold 40 copies of it, so he was pissed off. And a lot of times that's how it is. The best philosophers are totally ignored. Kind of like Schopenhauer before him. Schopenhauer is the greatest philosopher. He's better than Nietzsche, that Germany could ever produce, and he couldn't even get a job as a philosopher. And Schopenhauer said, the most uncommon thing to ever see in a philosophy university department is a professor who's actually really a philosopher. They're just doing it to put on airs and make some money. They don't really care about philosophy. Okay, Let us continue. When he's talking about being an artist, make the development of yourself the creation of a work of art. You must be objective. That's a big point. You must be objective to see the flaws in the early versions of a work so that you can recognize and correct them. If the artist is not able to recognize and fix the early flaws, then nothing good could be created. And I do think that that is true. You have to be able to say, I messed up. I was wrong. I have to do it a different way, a better way. Most people can't do that. That sounds simple, but most people cannot do that. Okay, that's something that's very hard for people who are conformist in their mentality to do, is to admit they were wrong and to change. But if you want to do advanced thinking, you have to say, oh man, I screwed up. I got to do it different. I got to do it better. Okay? So anyways, a scientific interpretation of the world as you understand might therefore still be one of the most stupid of all possible interpretations of the world, meaning that it would be one of the poorest in meaning. This thought is intended for the ears and consciences of our mechanists who nowadays like to try to pass as philosophers and who insist that materialism is the doctrine of the first and last laws, on which all existence must be based on the ground floor. But essentially, an essentially mechanical world would be a meaningless world. Assuming that one estimated the value of a piece of music according to how much it could be counted and calculated and expressed in formulas, how absurd would such a scientific estimation of music be? What would one have comprehended, understood, or grasped of music? Nothing, really nothing of what music is would be explained by that. So I think that's a great quote. So what he's basically saying is, a lot of times, maybe if you're doing electromagnetic, calculations, James Clerk Maxwell equations or something, or Newton's calculus, math is where it's at. But math has like nothing to do with personal relationships, okay? And a lot of other things, okay? And it's a little bit like, like Carl Jung had said. He said, science can only go so far, whereas myth can go way, 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 way beyond that, okay? And you don't ever see somebody who's math first, coming up with a lot of insights in this other stuff. You don't. They don't go together. The type of brain that does that. I also know I saw some guys when I was in high school who had math SATs, real high up in the 700s, but then their verbals would be really low. So I think that does happen. Okay. Some people say that Asians are like that. Fantastic at math, but not as skilled verbally. I don't know if that's true, but that's what some people say. But I have seen such a thing occur in men who are good at engineering and mathematics, but they're just not that articulate. They don't ever tell jokes. They don't talk much. So what I'm basically saying is, I don't think you have to have a high verbal IQ to have a high math IQ. They can be separate. Some people are really good verbally, but they stink in math in schools. I think anybody who's like clever, funny, like the class clown type of kid, they might be a lousy student, but there's something clever about them that they can make all those jokes and make you laugh. Anyways, here's a little bit about Nietzsche talking about God. He says, "Where has God gone? I shall tell you. God is dead, and we have killed him, you and I. What did we do when we unchained the earth from the sun? Whither is it moving now? Has it not become colder? Is more and more night coming on all the time? How shall we console ourselves? I come too early. This event is still on its way. It has not yet reached the ears of men." Yeah, people don't understand that they've been progressively turning their backs on God, and now they're starting to pay the piper and see their great, magnificent countries turn into third world crap holes. Okay. And Nietzsche himself was anti-Christian, but then he talks about how everything goes to crap once you get rid of Christianity, and it does. Okay, so let's make that the end of this as part 2, and then we'll come back later. We'll do a part 3 on Nietzsche.